Hi, I'm Kate Doheny. I'm a product and packaging designer. Welcome to my channel. I own two small businesses, Doheny Atelier and Doheny New York City. And today I'm going to talk about what it's really like to be an in-house junior designer or an entry-level designer for a corporate company. I'm going to talk a lot about my perspective on what an in-house experience is like when you're first starting out. It could be very different depending on what company and if it's in a different industry as well. I happen to work in the beauty industry. So when I first started out, I was so excited, super excited to get the role I had, and I couldn't wait to start designing. I remember that my boss, my first boss in the real world, told me, listen, a lot of young designers come out of design school and they get so excited that they're going to design all these cool things, but I want to let you know what this job really is. And that should have scared me a little bit, but I think it was actually really impactful and helpful because I did want to learn everything I could about design. And sometimes design is tedious. And honestly, I think that's half the reason why a lot of us designers became designers, because tedious can be fun. However, I also really love the creative concepting aspect. When I first started as a young designer, we didn't have AI. So, for example, one of the tasks that I was requested to do was to make coefficients. What are coefficients? Coefficients are essentially different layout options for an advertisement. I was working on big campaigns and it was very exciting to touch those campaigns. However, I still had this desire where I wanted to work on something that I created from the beginning as well. It was an incredible experience, and I will say that while I thought I was going to dive in and do more creative things for my first design job, it's something that I'm so grateful for. I think that doing the more detailed parts of design is something that will stick with you for the rest of your life. And it is actually probably more realistic when you're first starting out and you get that first gig. A lot of times when you're an entry-level designer, you're going to be assisting the creative directors, the art directors, the brand design managers. You are going to be doing a lot of the what might be considered menial work, but it is not just menial work. It's really important. And if you know how to do that work, it's going to set you up for the future because you will be a very strong designer with a really holistic background. When you're a recent grad, you might feel so excited about the design world and your new company, but you have to remember there are people that have worked really hard to get to where they are in the roles that they have. So it's really important to check your ego a little bit, as excited as you are, and recognize that you are there to learn, especially in the first couple years. And your time will come. You will get to do some really cool projects if you keep pushing and practicing, but you may not even realize how much you have to learn. I remember there was a designer in my first job who was helping me with a task, and I said something to her like, oh yeah, I know how to do that. And then she showed me how to do it, and she turned to me and she said, you knew how to do that? And I said, okay, no, I didn't. So there are many times where I myself can be honest with you, I have had a bit of an ego, and I thought I could do everything. I knew how to do everything, but man alive, I had a lot to learn. A lot of you young designers, recent graduates, have had amazing educations, but there's always something to learn when you're working for a company. So it's very likely that you might get work that other people don't want to do. And while that's quite frustrating, it still can be an opportunity for you to show your skills and talent. And it can also be an opportunity to play and to try to do the same thing that everyone's done before in a different way. You might just surprise your coworkers and yourself. Something else about in-house opportunities is that they are often working on one brand. So keep in mind that if you're starting out, you might think, oh, I'm going to do all these different projects and all this stuff. You might just be working on one brand. Even when I started at my massive company, I had just 1 or 2 brands in the beginning that I was focused on. And it's actually a really great thing to learn one brand really well, learning the guidelines, learning how to design the guidelines, and learning all the brand assets, codes, what makes it ownable are incredibly important aspects of design. And that will help you work for some major companies in the future if that's what you want to do. You can work for Fortune 500 companies who their brand is everything. Or if you really prefer to work for an agency and work on many different brands and practice working on many different guidelines, that's also an option. But don't feel too stressed or too sad if you're working on only one brand, because it is really, really valuable knowledge. I will say, after many years, it can get kind of, I don't want to say boring, but you might be ready to move on to try something new later on. But that knowledge of how to make that brand continually different and exciting for the consumers is incredibly important. And design is the beginning of everything else in that company and for those products that you're working on. So if you start off on design and then you start to do experiential design and activations, it's so important to know those brand guidelines. And you'll be so happy that you learned just how to do that by focusing, listening, paying attention to your managers. You may not realize this, but you may work with people at your first job that you will know for the rest of your life. And especially if you're in the creative industry, especially if you're in a niche industry, for example, I'm in the beauty industry, you might hear that person's name come up many, many times. You might run into them, you might work with them for a year or two and then move on to another job and then work with them again. It's really, really amazing just how small the packaging design industry is. It's really important to think about how you interact with your coworkers and your boss, and to make sure you're putting your best foot forward, because you never know who you're going to interact with in the future if you choose to stay in this industry. That being said, if you do have some time spent with people that are a bit more tough to handle, that's okay, and that's totally normal. That's normal in every corporate job that you might have. There are so many ways to navigate those relationships as well, while still being polite, friendly, and maintaining a great reputation. Something else that I did not fully realize until I started my first design job is that you'll be most likely, if you're in-house, you'll be working with marketing a lot. And a lot of companies are structured where marketing is actually the department that holds creative. So technically, creative is a marketing role. And what that means is you may not be taking direction 100% of the time from your creative director, depending on how your company is set up. The company that I worked at was so massive that things changed a lot, and it wasn't always exactly the same. But I can say that I have had times where I've reported to a marketing person and I've reported to a creative person. But I would highly recommend that you, as a designer, practice your marketing skills, because it is so valuable to collaborate with marketing well and to show them what your value is as a designer. And on that note too, as you learn, you're going to learn also how to stand up for your work, stand up for the integrity of the design, and speak about your work in a certain way that makes sense to people who are not creatives. Marketers are creative, but in a different way. And it's so important that you learn how to collaborate with them so you can bring together both of your skills and talents to create something so cool that the company will be really proud of. And I'm sounding so much like, oh, company drone or whatever, but it is actually really fun to build design for big brands. And it's super amazing if you can land a role that allows you to do that. It is really funny to reflect on these times when I was a young junior designer just starting out, because now that I have my own design agency and I have young designers helping me, it's really interesting. And I do try to, since I have my own business, I do try to give them some cool stuff to work on. So one perk of dealing with the drudgery of junior designer tasks is that when you are a manager yourself, you might be able to change the game a little bit. You might remember, oh man, when I was a junior designer, I had to do all these boring things. And you as a manager in the future might be able to give your junior designer, entry-level designer, something fun every once in a while. Of course, one of the hardest things for me when I was a junior designer was waking up early and going into the company office, normal office hours. Of course, now that I operate my own business, I can kind of, for the most part, make my own hours, which is really great. Like I said in my intro video, I am a night owl, and I didn't discover that till COVID, actually. I think that it's amazing to reflect when I was a junior designer. There are a lot of times where I was really struggling to function or think, and I think a lot of that has to do with just the hours. Speaking of the hours in a corporate environment, creatives often do get to come in a little bit later. That is not 100% true in all cases, so please don't quote me on that. You might be disappointed, but very often creatives could come at 10, 10:30. But of course, the catch is that then you have to leave at 6:30. So keep that in mind as well. There are some perks to being a creative. I would even say, at least from my experience, creatives often have a different dress code. We have sneakers, we wear jeans. Like, you still have to look professional, of course. You can't be wearing something quote unquote inappropriate in the office in general. But you can totally, for the most part, get away with wearing something way more casual than your finance, HR, marketing counterparts. I will say in the fashion world of creatives, it's amazing to be a creative and to go into a corporate environment because you get to see some really cool outfits. Even if they're a bit more casual, people really show up at work. And I've gotten so much inspiration from my coworkers, especially my fellow creatives in the office environment. So that's an awesome way that if you are kind of frustrated with a project you might be working on, maybe you can show up creatively in a different way for that day or week or however long that project is driving you nuts. I got a fan question from my boyfriend, and he said, what was the most intimidating part of being a junior designer? My answer to that would be, other than everything, interacting with professionals. Of course, you've worked with your professors, you've got to speak to probably some guest speakers when you're in college, but it feels quite intimidating to be around so many people who know what they're doing. You're the only one who doesn't really know what they're doing in that environment. Fortunately, through college and other experiences, you've been in that position many times before. So remember that you've started many times already. Feel confident in that and know that it will get easier. The first day is always the hardest. You might psych yourself out. Everyone has had a first day. Everyone's been a new person before. So don't feel like you're that different in a good way. And honestly, everyone says that, oh, as you continue your career, you're just kind of making up as you go along. And there's a lot of truth to that, but I mean, you definitely get to a point where you do feel like you know things. And yeah, so I think it's always hard to be in a place where everyone knows something that you don't really yet. So I think that's a good sampling of what it's like to be an in-house entry-level designer, at least from my experience. If you have any questions about the design world and any more questions specifically about being a designer, If you're just starting out, if you're a recent graduate, please feel free to leave them in the comments. I'd be so happy to answer them in a future video. And I really appreciate you watching this video, even if you're not a recent graduate, even if you are not even in design. Thanks so much for your support by viewing this. Please consider leaving a like. Please consider subscribing. So looking forward to my next video and so excited to be a part of YouTube.